Hello, and welcome to Utopian and Dystopian Fictions, a podcast hosted by me, Matt Leggett, a senior lecturer at the University of Winchester, where I teach utopian and dystopian fiction.
And me, Liam Knight, an independent scholar who holds a PhD in English literature from the University of Birmingham.
In each episode, we interview a different scholar, thinker, or writer, asking them to help us myth bust commonly held assumptions about utopias and dystopias.
If you like what you hear, please let us know by following the podcast, rating it on Spotify, or dropping us a message on utopian and dystopian fictions at gmail.com. So, Matt, we're doing things a little bit differently today as part of our season 2 recap / bonus episode. How about you tell the audience what we're going to get up to today?
I like the word finale. Season 2 finale. Sounds better, doesn't it? Sounds like some sort of grand climax.
That's the film and TV scholar in you.
Yeah. Sorry, I've lost track of what you've asked already.
Matt, what are we doing today?
What are we doing? Oh, yeah. Okay. So
we're talking about.
So we're gonna have a little bit of a recap. I think we kind of wanted to think back about the season and more tell you about what we've got coming up. Certainly, we want to thank our guests who've been brilliant, and then we're going to talk because it is spooky season. Where hopefully, if all being well, coming to you on Halloween. We wanted to talk about the sort of the thin line, the membrane between horror and dystopia. Actually, should be the other way around. We did between dystopia and horror. Anyway, So that was the thinking. Anyway, we'll see what actually happens.
Yeah.
We're less organized than we are. Normally, when we've got the interview, everything is much more sort of scripted and organized, right? But this is very off the cuff.
Which is the true horror for the listeners.
Yeah. but the true horror might be how much editing Liam has got to do at the end of this.
So season 2, Matt, how about we think about that for a moment?
Okay, right. So first of all, I think season 1, we had a lot of fun and we talked about Utopia a lot. Not by design. I mean, sort of by design, but it just, that was the way the cookie crumbled.
Sort of the skew, yeah.
Yeah, we kind of felt like, in season 2, we wanted to correct that a little bit and talk more about dystopia. Obviously, there's, a very thin line between the two often. But yeah, so we went out with that in mind. And yeah, I think that worked really well. There was still a couple of episodes that we sort of timed along the way where we talked about Utopia. I'm thinking about Utopia and the Law. We talked about in relation with Aoife and Ruth. That was episode 10, wasn't it? But yeah, we had episodes on Orwell. We had episodes on apocalyptic fiction. We spoke to an author who writes dystopian fiction, Eve Smith. So we kind of definitely focused more on that. And I think we're thinking in season 3, we want to do something a little bit more focused. We've kind of done Utopia and Dystopia polls, in that sense. And maybe we wanted to do something both more focused, but also kind of more inclusive. So having chatted a bit about this, we decided we wanted to theme the episodes quite broadly on sort of interdisciplinarity, the interdisciplinarity of the subject matter, Utopia and Dystopia, because there's so many people out there working on utopias, dystopias in so many different ways that we kind of wanted to capture that. We've had obviously a literature and maybe a film focus over the first couple of seasons, and we thought we'd want to challenge that a little bit. That we will still do literature, we will still do film, TV, etc., but we wanted to broaden that with our guests.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. I know we've got a list of people we'd love to speak to and we'll be reaching out to in sort of coming weeks. And like we're really excited, I think, by sort of the potential of the people we've got there and the really varied discussions that are going to be hopefully taking place. I suppose likewise, Matt, because we will have a short break of some description between seasons. If any of our listeners either have people that they want to recommend, or if they themselves have an interest in hopping along, you do feel free to get in touch. And maybe if the topic or the person you're thinking about is of interest and fits into maybe our sort of plan for the season, our schedule, and so on, it'd be cool to hear from the audience as well, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Audience engagement. We love it. We don't get loads of it.
Much
We've
of
had a
it.
bit. We've had a bit of it. We've had a bit of it, and it was like a drug. We want more of it now, right? So
Got
yeah,
the
do
itch.
get in touch. Yeah, every time someone gets in touch with us, it's it's sort of validation for it. So we'll take it however it comes. No, yeah, we do have a tentative lineup already, sort of in mind. So yeah, if loads of people come forward and say I would like to do it, that's great, and we may not have chance to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, reach out, let us know. And yeah, I think it's going to be fun, and it is such a broad church, and I think we're gonna discover that, and hopefully, if you are in this for the literature side of things, we're still going to be talking about that, and we're still going to sort of I think it will be more about how does this stuff that we're talking about fit into our ways of thinking about literature, and these kinds of things. So I don't think it will be, I hope it will be broadening rather than off-putting. It won't be random. It will just be extra variety, I think. So yeah.
And I suppose as well, it's not just like it's not just how do these other intersectional topics or interdisciplinary topics help us to know more about these books, but also how do these books and texts help us to learn more about other topics, or how are they used and applied in settings, if you like, other than maybe the more traditional literature or film or media classroom or space. So just
I mean,
thinking about
ultimately, we're both literature people, aren't we? So we're always going to come from that perspective. So when we're presented with these different fields of study, our instinct is going to be to try and force them into our kind of boxes that we've already kind of understand the world through. So I'm sure that we'll definitely cover that material as well.
For sure.
So I mean, maybe it's my turn to ask you then, Liam. I mean, we've been thinking about texts for this. I think last time at the end of season 1 we did a Christmas episode, simply because it happened to be around Christmas, and we thought that we'd bonus material. And that's been our least listened to episode. So we thought, well, let's do something really similar.
Let's do another one.
Yes, let's do another one. But this time it's Halloween. Everyone loves Halloween, right?
Yeah, it's spooky season. It's time to, I don't know, eat lots of sweets. What else does one do at Halloween? It's time to, I suppose, bunker down with some scary films or scary media, and I suppose sort of sit on the edge of your seat or be subjected to a jump scare or three. But I suppose we've been thinking, and when we were sort of loosely planning this chat, we were thinking that there's some intersections between horror and dystopia, and sometimes texts blur the boundary between the two of them a little bit. I know, Matt, you were saying earlier that you've just come off teaching a class about genre, and I suppose your mind is much more in this space than mine might be. So what do you have to say about the relationship between these two genres, or distinction between them, or whatever it is that you think about them?
Well, when we were discussing this, we sort of outlined a few texts that we might be interested in chatting about. So I'll come at it through the text rather than just talking about genre itself, I think. So we were originally talking about Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, which is where I think we could start. So short story, if you haven't read it, it's very famous. 1948 short story, originally published in the New Yorker. Doesn't take long. You can listen to it if you want. I think you said, Liam, that you'd listen to it in preparation for this as a kind of refresher. For anyone who hasn't read it, very, very briefly, it's set in a small village, about 300 people, somewhere we assume in America, quite abstract in terms of its setting. And it details a historical tradition the lottery. It takes place on one day during one moment when this lottery is taking place. And we don't really know what the lottery is. We just know that people are drawing lots and that they seem to be nervous. And, obviously, I don't know about you, but Liam, I associate the word lottery with some rich rewards, some prizes.
Yeah,
And if you
yeah.
win the lottery, it's something you want to win, right? So there's something a little bit off about it from the start because we know that these people should be excited, but maybe there's a sort of sense that there's something sinister about this. And again, read the story. It's a really great piece of pacing and well-paced writing, but essentially, the story involves the lottery winner, so to speak, being stoned to death at the end of the story. So that's how it ends. And we don't quite know until that very moment exactly. We get this creeping sense of dread that
Yeah.
something bad is going to happen, but we only find out at the end that this is it Tessie Hutchinson or Tessa?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Tessie.
Tessie.
Yeah.
She ends up being the kind of victim of this brutal attack. Although it's not that is as well as not described. In fact, I think that the short story simply ends with the idea that she's being set upon, and we're left to fill in the rest of the horror, so to speak. But yeah, I was kind of drawn to that story, I think, because I did write a little bit about it in the book, but not a great deal. And there are a bunch of texts that I kind of touched on in the book that I was talking about last time out, which I kind of saw were like more horror than they were dystopia, and I kind of sort of I acknowledged them because the book's about games and play in utopian and dystopian fiction, and I thought of things like the Saw franchise, for example, the Purge movies, those kinds of things. I kind of saw them as adjacently dystopian, but primarily kind of horror movies. And so I was kind of thinking about these texts that may or may not have kind of been considered dystopian. And this was one of those ones which I thought was kind of on that borderline. And I do write about it briefly, very briefly in the book. But yeah, I kind of think some of the differences between them are kind of telling. So I think, for example, and I know, we can talk about the lottery a bit more in a minute, Liam, but I think the lottery's political dimension is kind of where you can sort of put it in the category or field of dystopian fiction and not just horror. So it's a political dimension that's always implicit. It's never explicit, but yet it can be read quite easily in that way. There's an easy metaphor we can make that connects the world of the lottery to our world. In fact, I think that when the short story was initially published in 1948, it caused a bit of a stir because some readers wrote in demanding to know which American village did this event really take place, and which is kind of ludicrous when you read it today, but does suggest it is it's highly realist in its kind of delivery. In some senses, quite slow and labored, even you might suggest, but in another sense, it's very deliberately paced to unfold towards that dramatic and shocking conclusion, and also to build this increasing sense of disturbance and unsettling atmosphere that develops and comes from those horror elements. So maybe my kind of thinking is that horror is kind of located in the way in which the text is written and constructed. This is my kind of genre point here, in the way in which it's constructed, i.e. the development of that tension throughout, whereas the dystopia arises maybe along the story's political kind of axis, if you like. So that the kind of political reading of the text might be the lottery is America, the lottery is American life, or whatever, or just life. It doesn't even need to be American life. And that's one way of reading the story. I have others, but yeah, what do you think about the story?
Yeah, I think it's a dystopian classic, and I'm saying that dystopian intentionally. Yeah, it's one that I think we use in classroom spaces. Often I've taught it even at a secondary school level. Like we've read The Lottery, I think it's you've touched upon a point I was hoping we'd make, which is about the style of it is maybe where the horror elements can be found. I just made a note to myself earlier when I was listening to it. I think two elements for me that really make this stylistically a horror story is the use of foreshadowing, by which I mean that we've got all these small details being littered throughout the text that in the moment of them being shared seem either innocuous or they seem like unexplained, I suppose, and sort of they have weight or gravity, and yet we're not really sure what that weight is looking like, or if we say gravity metaphor, like what we're orbiting. So quite early in the text, I think it says that some of the boys are like collating the pile of stones, and that seems maybe not innocent because again other stones are weapon, for example, but there's something in that where, because it's very unexplained, it adds a sense of unease and dread. And then likewise, there's almost a sense of euphemism in the writing. And again, you touched upon it earlier, just a moment ago. The very final line of the text, and I'm just drawing the text up to get it correct. It isn't fair, it isn't right, Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were upon her. And so Jackson never explicitly says, and then they started throwing lots of stones at her and she died and blah 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 blah.
Mm.
I suppose it's tying into that age-old I don't know, not stereotype, saying cliche, that's what I want. Where the most horrifying thing is the thing in our head, like the things that we can imagine rather than the things that are being said or written, or the implicit is always more terrifying than the explicit.
Yeah, I think it's probably actually easier to convince readers or the audience or whoever we're talking to that this is a horror story, and maybe actually more difficult to tell them that it's kind of dystopia because its political dimension is kind of implicit. I mean, in it, the way I interpreted it in the book that I was writing was that I kind of noted that the society depicted in the microcosm in the lottery is really also the embodiment of stasis. So it's a village whose beliefs are so rigidly rooted in the past that they cannot see the violence done by those, through those beliefs, and that history is regarded as above all other things. So there is a kind of ideological structure to the text, which allows us to read it as a dystopia, right?
Yeah.
Interesting enough, next week I'm teaching Lois Lowry's novel The Giver, which I don't know if you've read, but is a wonderful novel, and absolutely everyone should read it in my view. And weirdly enough, because I've added it to the module the first time this year, and already I've had students who've got ahead of the reading speak to me and say, "Oh, I loved it." And
wow.
They don't have that about a lot of them. Normally they don't do that. So I'm really quite looking forward to Monday's lecture and seeing what they made of it. I know it's very regularly taught in America, or certainly was. But what's interesting about that is that it's almost like the opposite of The Giver, because in The Giver, and I won't kind of spoil it and just butcher it by telling you what the plot of The Giver is, because I won't do it justice. But essentially, the difference is that in that novel, the dystopia arises out of an absence of, rather than an excess of, history. So in the lottery, it's kind of, we're bound to history, we're sort of tied and tethered to it, and that produces the dystopia. But in The Giver, it's the fact they don't have a history that is where the dystopia arises. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and just sort of demonstrated that it does have dystopian features.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the case, but I also wondered if Jackson was influenced by a short story by the celebrated Argentinian short fiction writer Jorge Luis Borges, who in 1941 published a short story called Lottery in Babylon, which details a society that becomes addicted to a lottery. And at first, in his story, it's elective, and there are prizes that incentivize participation. But eventually, over the years, participation becomes kind of mandatory and starts to feature punishments, even as extreme as mutilation and death, for example. And then ultimately, I think in Borges's version, this again is kind of used as a metaphor for life and its random nature. So in the final line, he writes that Babylon is, quote, nothing else than an infinite game of chance. So, you know, it comes to stand in for life in a similar way to what I think Jackson is doing, but she just doesn't, it's not as on the nose with her. She doesn't write that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about like the past and the history that's really evident, but again, still very implicit in this text is something that I was really drawn to as well. I know there's a brief moment in the lottery where some of the characters are discussing how some other villages nearby or towns nearby, they're thinking of doing away with the lottery, and the characters are quite outraged by that prospect. You know, with a sort of that old sort of saying like, "Oh, what do the children know? What do they want? You can't trust the young with anything." But then likewise, although it's this society of this village is so tethered to history or a sense of the past, the past itself is really degraded. By which I mean it's gone under degradation, right? It's decaying, it's fragmentary. You know, the box is worn. Rather than, I think it says originally they used wooden chips to decide who wins the lottery, and it's now become slips of paper. I think there's another moment as well where there's a much older character who sort of says, he discusses how many years he's been drawn in a lottery, or not drawn in a lottery, if you know what I mean. How many years he's
77, I think.
Yeah. And again, like is there for him, has he even forgotten the value or the worth or the necessity or the reason for it? I know right at the top of the story, they allude to the fact that if the lottery takes place, it's good for harvest. And that's also quite interesting. But if we talk about harvest, I know this is an American text, and maybe I'm coming with a very British sense of harvest in my mind. But that again is something we associate with autumn and spooky season. That's just a really innocuous random tangent, but
it feels quite like a kind of seasonal text, actually. I think maybe that's why it sprung to my mind initially when we talked about it. There are other moments as well, I think quite near the beginning of the short story, where they talk about, and I can't remember exactly what it is now, but they do discuss ways in which the lottery has changed, and various different rituals that they used to have been gradually forgotten or replaced. But the main one of us stoning someone, apparently that's not something that they've thought should be replaced. That sort of fits with your line that it has sort of degraded over time. I think that's a good reading.
Likewise, there's I actually wrote this note. There's they connect the lottery to other civic activities. That's the quote. Comparing it to things like square dances that take place in this village. And so again, the lottery has become quite normalized or trivial. It's a ritualistic stoning of a random person in the village is by no means equatable to square dancing. And so making it that, I think, speaks to how maybe, again, it's degraded, it's become normalized, it's maybe trivialized a little bit.
But that's also its dystopian dimension, isn't it? Because that hints at or points to some kind of cavalier attitude that the society holds toward life, and and so I think that's where again the political dimensions of it are not explicitly rendered, but they are, they're there to be read. So I think that's another good angle on it.
I've got a couple of quick minor points to make on this, if I may, Matt, which is reading it again and us talking about it. It reminds me of some of the more folk horror texts that maybe have come out in the last few years, especially like in film, and really in particular, I think of Midsummer. There's something about it that's quite Midsummer-esque, and that's a film I probably will try to watch like this Halloween. Actually, I really, really enjoy it. But the other note, because that was just a tiny, tiny thing. I said to you before we started recording that I'd found a quote from outside the text that I wanted to bring in here. It's not from your book. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that to you again.
There's a dawning realization on my face there. I was like, oh, not again, not two times running. Yeah, go
on. So the lottery features in a very, very prominent piece of popular culture by the name of The Simpsons. So there's a Simpsons episode called, I'm trying to find the name in my notes, called Dog of Death. And this is an episode in which Springfield, the town of Springfield, goes mad with buying lottery tickets. And as part of this craze, lots and lots of people in Springfield have taken out copies of the lottery from the library. And of course, they do that because they think it's going to teach them how to win the lottery. And Homer is someone who does that. And so in a news report in The Simpsons, Kent Brockman says, people have been doing this, but the book actually contains no answers. And Homer, in a fit of Homer-esque rage, throws his copy of the book into a fire. But then Brockman continues and says, of course, the book does not contain any hints on how to win the lottery. It is rather a chilling tale of conformity gone mad. And I think that's just a brilliant summation of the text, but also speaks maybe to the dystopian elements of it. We have this village of people who are completely unthinking in their acceptance of this tradition, and are almost blind to its faults or blind to sort of the evils and issues contained therein. And so that I guess is where I agree with you. Like that is where the dystopian mesh of Jackson's text sort of takes place.
Go back to the Simpsons as a kind of source of wisdom.
It is. It is.
But actually, again, in that sense, it's actually quite like The Giver. There's this kind of cultish element, isn't it, where it is about kind of blind conformity, even if that conformity relates to entirely opposing viewpoints about history in that particular instance. I was thinking about other texts. Obviously, Jackson's tale is more towards the kind of horror side of the divide. Then I was trying to think of texts that were maybe sort of on the dystopian side, but feature kind of horror. And the one that sort of sprung to my mind was Anthony Burgess's or Stanley Kubrick's, depending on your interest, text A Clockwork Orange. And I kind of thought that it demonstrates how horror can feature in a dystopian text, dystopian horror, if you like, if that's a kind of subgenre, rather than dystopia being read into horror fiction as maybe it is with Jackson. So I kind of think of Orange as first a dystopia, then as a horror, whereas with The Lottery, I kind of move it in the other direction. So yeah, I'm guessing you're familiar with at least a little bit with The Clockwork Orange.
No, I this is one text that I have bought and read. So I have done that for once.
I mean, I don't think probably the audience for this podcast probably won't need a summary of it. But if you do need a summary, you could pause this recording and you can go and read it beforehand and then return. Anyway, but yeah. So firstly, I think what's interesting, again, I'm thinking about the genre here, is that the world of Clockwork Orange is substantially different from our own. Right? It is speculative in this regard. So we can tell this immediately by the distinctive language that Burgess uses in the novel, which it actually, initially is quite off-putting. People found it very difficult to read. And in Kubrick's version, of course, the distinctive clothing worn by the characters immediately cues us into this idea that it is substantially a different place to our own. And then sort of dissociating from the present in this way immediately draws us towards a reading of the text as dystopian, right? We're encouraged by that to think of it as dystopian rather than as horror. And yet horror arises in the text. Like Jackson's story, there is a degree to which Clockwork Orange is deeply unsettling throughout. We are asked to relate in it, in particular, to a protagonist we know to be intensely violent, misogynistic, for example, but we're also gradually asked to side with him over an oppressive society. And then there's a sort of visual and iconographic level as we kind of witness his violence. But the real horror comes from the violence done to him by the state. So again, that's that kind of political dimension that tells us it's a dystopia rather than a horror text. So the enduring image, really, at least in my mind, of Kubrick's version, is when we see the teenage Alex subjected to the Ludovico technique, which is probably the most famous part of the movie or the novel, which is a kind of form of reprogramming. It's an invented method of brainwashing where Alex is made to sit with his eyes forced open by grim-looking metal clamps while being subjected to violent media and induced to feel physical discomfort so that he will associate violence with physical and psychological distress. So in some senses, this is, again, it's horror, but it's dystopian horror first and foremost. It's that dystopian side. So that's kind of what I was thinking about with, and I've kind of cheated here as well, Liam, because we agreed we would talk about a text each, and I've cheated. I've talked about two, but it was my way of sort of thinking about that divide a little bit.
No, that's fair. And I think you're right in saying that in A Clockwork Orange, the horror is dystopian insofar as it is something horrifying that is done to Alex by the state, right? It's the dystopian machinations that do the horrifying thing. I guess to an extent we could argue that similarly, Winston's torture in the Ministry of Truth is a horrifying element at the very least of 1984, right? It's this extreme violence done to him by the state, by the political regime. I think a lot of dystopia is rooted on control and coercion and restriction and so on and so forth, which sucks, obviously, but I don't know if I'd call it horrifying in the sense that it becomes quite pervasive. It becomes this norm. It becomes almost background and yet still very clearly in the foreground. And yet there's still, I guess, these instances where these dystopian regimes in Clockwork in 1984, where they ramp up that violence, where they ramp up that obliteration of the individual up to 11 or 12 or 13. And that's where it's horrifying, especially, I think, where violence in its myriad forms is done to the individual.
I suppose, just thinking backwards at the lottery again, I mean, we could say that, again, it focuses on violence done to an individual by the state. In this case, the state is much smaller, and the state is a village kind of community. We could say that the same model is in play, but I would suggest that the difference is that the lottery makes a point of us getting to know these people that will throw the stones. So it doesn't feel like the state anymore. It feels like people.
Yeah.
In A Clockwork Orange, it's disconnected from people. It is very much a regime.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that, again, seems to be a kind of difference between the two.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with you there. I think likewise, I'm almost reluctant to sort of see the village in the lottery as the state, because it is so it's quite a flat hierarchy almost. Of course, there's a lot of gender dynamics going on in the text, but in terms of, although there are a couple of characters who are orchestrating, they're in charge of organizing the lottery, they seem to still be very much able to be drawn from it. For example, I think I actually don't remember off the top of my head, but it's quite flat. Whereas in Clockwork, it's very top down. It's never, the violence is done by the state, really,
You
not
don't
by
you
an
don't see
individual.
directly who's in charge of these
Mm,
things. You know,
mm,
a bit like the Big Brother. You know, where the there is a figurehead or a concept or an idea that
mm.
supersedes an individual,
Yeah.
in power. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the village is the lottery itself is being run by, what is it, Mr. Summers or Summer,
Hmm,
Mr. Summers,
hmm.
I think. But they make a point that he's only kind of a functionary in some capacity. He's not really in charge as such. He's not like the leader of the village. He just happens to be um, respected and put in charge of this very important event, that yearly event. Anyway, well, what was the text that you are bringing to this, Liam?
Yeah, well, I suppose thinking again about a text that straddles maybe these two genres, but maybe is a bit more in line with A Clockwork Orange insofar as it is a dystopian short story in which horrifying things occur. I want to talk about The Veldt by Ray Bradbury. Don't know why that happened. So this is a
Ray
1950.
Radbury.
Bray Bradbury. He's so cool. He's Bradbury. So it's a 1950 short story, originally called "The World the Children Made," and it appeared in the Saturday Evening Post, and then was republished in a 1951 anthology under the title "The Veldt."
Oh, the original
Um,
title, I didn't know that was way better. Should have
yeah, I
stuck with
think
that.
like Veldt as well is like it's not a word that I'm really that familiar with until reading this text, and so I was like, well, what is it? And
Mm.
obviously, the Veldt is just like a savanna or a bit of scrubland, which then is an important part of the setting. But the world the children made, I think, is it's much more captivating, and again,
Mm.
maybe more clearly dystopian and or horrifying.
Mm.
So I'll do a little, I guess, like summary of the text as we did with the lottery, especially because it's one that I think we anticipate the audience will maybe be slightly less familiar with. So this is a short story about the Hadley family who live in an automated house called a Happy Life Home. And this house essentially automates every element of domesticity for them. So, like their shoes are tied for them, they are bathed by machines, they are cooked for, and so on and so forth. So it's about a family. The Hadleys, George and Lydia, are the parents, and they have two children, Peter and Wendy, whose names, Peter Pan. There's a clear parallel going on there. They have a nursery in the house, and this is a VR room, as you might sort of typically see in science fictional texts, where the children go off and play, and they are, I suppose that they anticipate the iPad babies, by which I mean they are obsessed with this tech. They can't get enough of being in this room. Um, Now, the fact that this house is fully automated, it's kind of made George and Lydia, the parents, kind of redundant in their own family. They don't seem to have any authority over the children. I think they speak to sort of feeling quite listless and out of place, and like expressing concern about like their children's behaviour. The children don't listen to them, and so on. But the nursery, the VR room, is stuck on a wild African veldt, so it's a piece of savanna, scrubland, whatever, um, in which lions quite commonly appear and seem to be repeatedly eating on something. And the children are fascinated with this, and the VR room is stuck on this setting. Um, the parents talk to a friend who's a psychiatrist who says, leave your home, move country, go be more self-sufficient, and so on and so forth. And I think in a moment of anger, feeling disrespected by his children, George says to them, right, I'm closing down the VR room, closing down the nursery, which the kids are besides themselves about. They're gutted. Um, so they ask dad for just like one more play before you lock it up forever, and George and Lydia, they sort of give in. um And I suppose I'm now getting to spoiler territory, but we gave the lottery away, so I'll give this away too. As the text progresses, there's these hints that the lions are feasting on something familiar, familiar to George and Lydia. There's mentions to hearing familiar screams come from the nursery. There's a moment in which a scrap of material that resembles one of their sort of pieces of clothing is found in the VR room. And as it transpires, the parents go down to the VR room, to the nursery, and trying to find their children, can't find them anywhere. And as they set foot into the nursery, their kids slam the door behind them, lock them in, and then come the lions. And the text ends with the psychiatrist, friend, neighbor popping into the house and sort of asking, where are your parents? And Peter and Wendy take him into the nursery where the lions are feasting on some carcasses in the distance.
Sort of like the end of the lottery in that sense, isn't it? Where the violence happens off screen in some capacity.
Yeah, well, that was something when I was thinking about this text, and especially in relation to the lottery. I think that's where, again, I found sort of that horror element, or is one place where I found that, which is in that sort of the building of tension. So in the lottery, we've got the pile of stones, we've got the hubbub and the clear anxiety that a lot of the characters face, and here we have the parents feel of unease in their own home, the sort of almost antagonistic relationship that they have with their children, especially the son. The son in particular seems to be a bit more spiky with his parents. The hearing of a familiar scream, and again, it's a familiar scream. It's that bit of euphemism. I think when I was reading it, I thought, oh, is it the children screaming? But then the parents just lie in bed, hearing this scream, but they do nothing about it. And again, that's very interesting. And again, there's always these lions. There's the scrap of clothing, and so on. And yeah, it happens off screen. So that building up of tension, these littering of details, the foreshadowing, and the euphemism, I think, for me is stylistically where maybe a horror element occurs in the text.
But more readily, it's a dystopia because it's speculative and puts us immediately in a kind of environment that we know is a future environment, not our own, etc. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of made me think of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, just because I teach it, and it, that's a short kind of gothic story where a room has a kind of life of its own and threatens the kind of people inside in a sense, or the person inside. Yeah, it's a really interesting short story. I wasn't familiar with it prior to you sort of recommending it. Having been writing again quite a lot about Star Trek, as I sort of mentioned before. I was thinking about the kind of holodeck a little bit. And the holodeck, of course, in Star Trek is a space, generally speaking, of utopian pleasure, imagination, fantasy, etc., escape. But there are these episodes that occur where they get locked into the holodeck, and they get chased by various things, or the settings go haywire, and things become threats suddenly. It's kind of, one wonders how much that sort of stuff might be inspired by this story. It felt quite familiar in that sense.
And even in Futurama, which again I suppose is a text that will be drawing on Star Trek, but Futurama's often has an episode with like a VR room where things go awry, or I can't remember the name of it now, but in the X-Men universe, they have a VR training room, and again, there's occasions where things go wrong within that. So certainly, as a more science fictional, speculative concept of having this VR space where a glitch or some issue with it makes it from a place of play or practice. This text and play, we're linking back to the most recent episode, but where this play subverts and becomes a scene of horror or fear or danger, and danger that's like not easily escaped because of the issues. I did want to talk a little bit, Matt, about why dystopian though. Why is this more clearly dystopian than horror? And I think you've done a bit of work there for me already in setting that up. I think for me, this is more commonly called a science fiction text, and I actually push against that as well. And I think I see it more clearly as dystopian, although maybe that's just my bias coming through here. Because as much as this is a text about a science fictional concept, right? This, virtual reality
for
room.
example.
Yeah, it's about the tech. Yeah, really, for me, the heart of the story is coming through where we see the breakdown of the family unit. This utter tension among the parents and their children. The fact that this unit of, I guess, rigidity and love and value and whatever else we might sort of speak about families has been warped. And it's been warped because the children essentially see the house, and definitely the VR room, as superseding their parents. I think the psychologist character makes basically a comment on that line as well, saying, well, in the children's eyes, you're obsolete compared to this room and this house. The house gives them everything they need. You're no longer needed. And so for me, this is an instance where, although we have a text that is quite focused on the tech, at its heart, that tech is then doing something to society. It's doing something to the relationships people have with each other. It's doing something to how we treat one another. And that, for me, I think, is always a real core element of dystopia. I think anywhere where we see the breakdown of human relationships or the warping of those sort of units and societal structures, for me, is a core dystopian element. I suppose here we just don't see the oppressor is not the state. The oppressor is not some mustachioed figure who may or may not exist. It's a piece of technology.
And we can all get on board with that right now. I think,
Yeah.
it feels like, we're more likely. I don't know. We live in a world of mustachioed figures and technology, or what feels like kind of autonomous pieces of technology that seem to have a kind of mind of their own, that want to kind of change our patterns of working and living, and we're just somehow supposed to be victims to this, and not raise concerns about it. It's just part of progress. Roll over, move out the way, or perish, kind of thing.
Yeah. What about this text stood out for you, Matt?
I mean, I didn't really sort of go through it and make loads of notes, actually. I just sort of, I liked it. I actually, weirdly enough, I mean, Ray Bradbury is obviously a very important figure in the genre. I have to say, I preferred it to Fahrenheit 451, which I I don't know, I find kind of a great concept. He's someone, I mean, he's very good at short fiction, Bradbury. I think because he's great with ideas and concepts, and it's fundamentally the idea or concept that carries this particular text, as it is the idea or concept that carries Fahrenheit 451, for example. But Fahrenheit 451 is just a concept. It doesn't feel like the rest of the story makes a great deal of sense to me, at least. Whereas here, because we don't have such a long story, it was quite neat. It's what, 15 pages, something like that. It's an enjoyable read. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it. But yeah, I don't think I can definitely see how it works in conjunction with this text, with the lottery. Sorry, and I think that in general, would I call it a Halloween text? I don't know, but it is creepy, and interestingly enough, a lot of the texts we've talked about today contain children in some way, or kind of warp childhood in some capacity. I'm thinking about Back to Lottery again, and the way in which it's the children sort of piling up the stones. That's the thing that's really particularly disturbing. The children are also involved in the lottery. They are also drawing lots. Why, shouldn't there be an age cutoff at least, so that the people that are victims to this, have at least lived a certain period of time before they're potential victims of the lottery? It's disturbing. And here we've got, again, it's that kind of subversion, isn't it, where the children become kind of dominant, and we might read it in a way that that's the natural way of the world in a technological world, right? The natural way of it is that the children become the dominant force. They are the wielders of that technology. I'm getting older, and
And
I'm
you've got a
looking at
kid.
this technology. Maybe sometimes I think my resistance to AI and these kinds of things is that just because I'm getting old and obsolete, Liam. I don't know. It might be. Maybe I'm being a luddite or something here, but yeah. So I thought that was interesting. That children keep coming up, and children sort of are frequently central to horror
Mm,
texts, partly because I think, children are vulnerable, and so we can
mm,
feel for them, we can connect with them. Children are also unfathomable in a way. I mean, obviously, and listeners will probably know if they've listened to more than one episode. But I've got what is essentially a 9-month-old now, and he will look at things, and you're like, what the hell is he looking at? Can he see into some other realm that we cannot see? They are impossible to quite understand. There's always this disconnect between the child's consciousness and yours, um, and that there's always a concern that they're thinking things that you can't quite control. That's what's uncontrollable about them. So I think that's partly why I think they're sort of resource for horror fiction.
mm.
And
Well,
then
they're
I'm now
often.
thinking about, sorry, I was going to say, well, now I'm thinking about, well, what is it? Do they frequently arise in dystopian fiction as well?
Mm.
And if so, how and why? Is that what you were going to sort of talk about?
Yeah, that, and just that in both senses, both in horror and dystopia, children are often undeserving of the things that happen to them. A child is not deserving of being, I don't know, subject to a serial killer's, slashing. Nor are, say, in the Hunger Games, are children, deserving of being put into a fight for the death. That just isn't, that they're not deserving of that. And
They're
I wonder if,
innocent.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
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 that's
fundamentally
probably the
innocent.
better word to have used, to be honest. But yeah, that they are innocent, and I wonder if that's why they are such sort of ripe ground for these speculative, because obviously horror can come under the speculative genre, but these speculative imaginings, that often are in some way, warning us of something, or they are scary, or they are, unnerving, unsettling, or whatever. I suppose, if it was just a random bloke, it's not as scary or as worrisome or as cruel as it may be if it's a child.
They're the ultimate litmus test for injustice, aren't they? Because
Mm.
if you've got an adult is always guilty of something. Adults are
Well,
tainted.
speak for yourself, Matt.
Yeah, but what I mean. I don't know what the
Yeah, yeah,
age
yeah.
is where you suddenly when you suddenly go into that sort of phase where you are an adult. It's clearly not just like 18.
Mm.
There's a difference between an 8-year-old in a piece of fiction and a 16-year-old, right? So at some point, there is a slide towards a loss of innocence, a moment
Mm.
that sort of signifies that. But yeah, I think innocence is sort of central to it because um, utopian and dystopian fiction are all about justice and injustice in often and frequently. And I was thinking about sort of Omelas, where we talked about in episode 1, and we've talked about it several times. That makes obviously the child at the center, and asks us,
Mm.
well, um, if that playing the kind of, if that was an adult instead of a child game with that, it's a different thing, because we would see an adult as already corrupted to some extent, whereas because that child is totally innocent and hasn't possibly done anything that can mean they deserve the kind of suffering that they receive. That's the key to the way in which the tale works. So
Mm.
yeah, I don't know, just sort of me thinking out loud, but children are central to all of these texts we've been touching on. I mean, again, I talked about Clockwork Orange. Alex is a teenager, and he is obviously not innocent,
Mm.
but yet is he as deserving of the kind of punishment as of the state that the state delivers as an adult is.
Mm. Mm.
There's a kind of morally sort of grey area there about, is he old enough to really understand or be responsible for his actions? That's kind of at the heart of that story.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, do you have any sort of final concluding thoughts on
No, no,
horror and dystopia? No more thoughts.
no more wisdom.
No more
No,
wisdom.
other than to say this, Liam, we last time round we were saying, well, at the beginning of this episode, we pointed out that last time round when we did a kind of bonus seasonal episode, it wasn't, not to say it wasn't well received. We didn't have any hate mail, but not many people listened to it for whatever reason. And I wonder whether part of the problem was it was short. People saw it, you see, Liam, and they thought, this is bonus material. It's not important. It's only half an hour. So we've done really well to
To
like
talk for
string this
basically an
out,
hour.
haven't we? To like, I don't know, about an hour.
Yeah.
So that's all really I want to say with that. No, I think maybe that's a good point to kind of sign off for a little bit and say we will be back. Watch this space. We've got lots of exciting things planned, but we will be taking a bit of a break. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, just we will be back sounds quite horrifying, right? Like Matt
Yeah.
and Liam will return in season 3.
Yes, with lots of nice treats instead of the tricks.
Yes, yes. Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure as always. Listener, I hope you found our rambles to be more coherent than not. And yeah,
Occasionally coherent.
Yeah, occasionally sensible or sense making. Here's to season 2 of the Utopian and Dystopian Fictions podcast, and we look forward to seeing you all again. That's probably not the right thing to say, but look forward to seeing you all again in season 3.